43, I made my Amish wife apologize to the woman I had betrayed her with. There's a woman in our district, I won't say her name yet, who kept a garden behind her barn that smelled like the inside of a root cellar in August. That thick, green, almost bitter smell, the kind that gets into the fibers of your shirt and stays. Rebecca, my wife, she caught that smell on me one evening in October when I came through the kitchen door, and I watched her whole face change. Not anger, something worse than anger. Her jaw set the same way my dad's did before he said something he couldn't take back. She didn't ask me where I'd been. She already knew. And the thing is, I wasn't doing what you think. But I was doing something I had no business doing without telling her, and in our world that's close enough. I'd been going to this woman, a healer, a broker's daughter, for 6 weeks, in secret, because our youngest, our Daniel, had a cough that wouldn't break. Not a winter cough. A deep, wet, rattling thing that shook his whole chest and left him gasping for air in the dark at 3 in the morning. Rebecca had tried everything she knew. The mullein tea, the onion poultice on his feet, the steam tent with eucalyptus and thyme over the kitchen stove. None of it held. And give me a second here. I went behind her back to a woman she hadn't spoken to in 4 years. I want to tell you why. But first you need to understand what that silence cost. I was 31 years old, and I didn't know the half of it. Quick pause. My name is Joseph, and this is Rebecca's husband. If these stories stay with you, if they remind you of something the old ones knew, subscribe. It's free, and it's the reason I can keep telling them. Tell me in the comments, was there ever a remedy someone in your family kept secret, and did the secret hurt more than the sickness? And if you want to go further, a super chat or a membership, that's you telling me these old ways are worth remembering. That keeps this going. Now, back to what happened. The thing you have to understand about healing in our community is that it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the family. It belongs to the church. There's an order to it. The Ordnung doesn't spell it out in so many words, but everybody knows. When a child gets sick, the mother tries first. She has her teas, her tinctures, her poultices. She has the recipes her ma'am gave her, written on index cards in that faded pencil handwriting that smells like the drawer it's been sitting in for 30 years. If the mother's remedies don't work, the father goes to the broker, if there is one in the district, or to the older women who keep the knowledge. You don't go to the English doctor first. That's not a rule anyone wrote down. It's just the air you breathe. And here's the thing nobody tells you from the outside. It's not about stubbornness. It's not about being backward. It's about trust. We trust the land. We trust the plants got put in the ground. We trust the hands of the people who've been pulling those roots and drying those leaves since before any of us were born. I didn't learn this from a book. I learned it from watching Ma'am press a warm, comfrey poultice against my dad's shoulder the winter he fell off the hay wagon. She didn't explain it. She just did it, and his shoulder healed. But the thing about that trust is it runs on silence. Nobody asks why. Nobody questions whose remedy is better than whose. And if a woman in the district has a reputation for healing, for knowing things the other women don't, there's a fine line between respect and something else. Something that looks like jealousy but isn't, exactly. It's more like territory. Rebecca had her remedies. Her mother, Sarah, had taught her well. Chamomile for the nerves. Elderberry syrup every October before the cold set in. A garlic and honey paste for ear infections that she wrapped in a warm cloth and held against the children's heads while she hummed hymns from the Osbund. She was good at it. She was proud of it. In the quiet way our women are proud, where they don't say it, they just keep doing it. And I think that's why what I did cut so deep, because when I went to someone else for help with our son, I wasn't just breaking a secret. I was telling her, without meaning to, that what she had wasn't enough. Her name was, I'll call her Martha. That's not her real name, but it's close enough. Martha was Enos Yoder's daughter, the one who married into the Stoltzfus family, down past the covered bridge on Route 340. Her father, Enos, had been the closest thing our district had to a braucher for 40 years. He did the braucherei, the laying on of hands, the quiet prayers, the specific plants he grew in a plot behind his smokehouse that nobody else was allowed to touch. He grew things I didn't even have names for as a boy. things with dark leaves and white roots that he'd dry on wooden racks in his attic where the heat collected in July. Martha learned from him, not because he taught her directly. Enos was a quiet man, the kind who ate his supper without saying 10 words, but because she watched. The same way I'd watched Ma'am. The same way all of us learned, by standing in the doorway and not being told to leave. Rebecca and Martha had been close once, before I even came into the picture. They'd grown up 3 farms apart, gone to the same one-room schoolhouse, sat next to each other at singings. But something happened between them. I never got the full story. Rebecca would only say, "She made a choice, and I made mine." I asked once, early in our marriage, what that meant. Rebecca was kneading bread dough at the time, and her hands didn't stop moving, but her eyes went somewhere I couldn't follow. "Some women think they know more than they do," she said, and that was the end of it. I didn't push. In our community, a husband doesn't push on certain things. That's not weakness. No, actually, maybe it is. I don't know what it is. I just know I didn't ask again. Not for 7 years. Daniel was 4 when the cough started. Late August, right when the goldenrod was blooming thick along the fence lines and the air was heavy with pollen and dust from the last hay cutting. At first we thought it was the usual, a summer cold, maybe some croup. Rebecca made her mullein tea, the recipe her mother had written on a card so old the edges were soft as cloth. She steeped the dried leaves in a pot on the stove. I can still see the steam curling up past the kerosene lamp that hung over the kitchen table, the one with the cracked glass globe we never replaced. She strained it through cheesecloth twice, added raw honey from our own hives, and spooned it into Daniel's mouth while he sat on her lap, his little bare feet dangling, his eyes already glassy with fever. It didn't help. Not that night. Not the next. By the 2nd week, the cough had changed. It wasn't dry anymore. It was wet and deep, and it came from somewhere down in his chest that sounded, I don't know how to say this, it sounded like something was living in there, like the air had to fight its way past something thick. He'd wake at 2, 3 in the morning, coughing so hard his face turned red and his eyes streamed, and he'd look at me with this expression. He was 4 years old, and he looked at me like he was asking me to fix it. Rebecca tried the onion poultice. She tried the steam tent. She tried a thyme and eucalyptus wash she heated in the iron kettle. She tried rubbing rendered tallow mixed with peppermint oil on his chest, the way her grandmother had done for whooping cough. She was up every night. I'd find her at dawn, sitting in the rocking chair by his bed with her hand on his back, just feeling him breathe. Her eyes had that look, not scared exactly, determined, like if she could just find the right leaf, the right root, the right combination, she could pull whatever it was out of him with her own hands. But it wasn't breaking. 3 weeks in, and the cough was worse. Daniel was losing weight. His collarbones stood out like 2 small ridges under his nightshirt. He didn't want to eat. He'd take a few spoonfuls of broth and push the bowl away. I remember standing in the barn one morning, the barn with the loft door that never closed right, the one Dat helped me rehang twice, and I could hear Daniel coughing from inside the house, 50 yards away, through closed windows. That sound went into my chest and sat there like a stone, and I thought about Martha. I thought about what Enos Yoder used to make, a tincture, lobelia and wild cherry bark and something else, something he never told anyone. People in the district used to say Enos could break a cough in 3 days that nothing else could touch. He'd been gone, no, wait, he'd been gone 2 years by then. 3. He died the winter Daniel was born, actually. But Martha still had his recipes. Martha still had his garden. Everybody knew it. Nobody talked about it. And Rebecca would rather have let the English doctors take Daniel to Lancaster General than walk up Martha's porch steps. That's how deep it went. Whatever was between them, it was bedrock. So I did something I'd never done in my marriage. I lied. Not a big lie, not one I'm proud of. I told Rebecca I was going to see about lumber at the mill past Intercourse, and I hitched the buggy and drove to Martha's farm instead. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Martha was hanging laundry when I pulled up. Dark blue dresses and small white shirts on a line that ran from the porch post to an old walnut tree. Her hands were red from wringing. She looked at me for a long moment. She knew whose husband I was. She knew Rebecca and I. She knew all of it. But she didn't send me away. She dried her hands on her apron and said, "It's the boy," not a question, just a fact, like she'd been waiting. And I said, "Ja, it's the boy." She nodded once and walked toward the garden behind the barn. I followed her down a path between rows of plants I couldn't name, dark green, silver-leafed, some with purple flowers, already going to seed. The smell hit me before we even got to the back plot, that thick, living, bitter green smell, like the earth itself was breathing. She knelt by a low plant with fuzzy leaves and started pulling, not cutting, pulling, the whole root out of the ground. Her hands worked the soil the same way I'd seen Enos's hands work it when I was a boy. Same angle, same patience. She didn't talk while she worked. She pulled lobelia, she pulled wild cherry bark from a tree at the edge of the plot, and then she went to a small shelf inside a shed, barely bigger than an outhouse, where brown glass bottles sat in rows, labeled in pencil with a handwriting that wasn't hers. It was Enos's. I recognized it. She took one bottle down, held it up to the light coming through the one dusty window, and said, "7 drops in warm water, morning and night. Don't add honey. The honey fights it. 7 drops. That's all." I carried that bottle in my coat pocket all the way home, and I said nothing to Rebecca. Not one word. That was the first visit. There were 5 more. Each time I told Rebecca I was going to the mill, or to see about fencing, or to help a neighbor with a roof patch. Each time I drove to Martha's, and she gave me what Daniel needed. After the first 3 days, the cough started to loosen. By the end of the first week, Daniel was sleeping through the night. By the second week, he was eating again. His color came back. That hollow look around his eyes filled in. Rebecca noticed. Of course she noticed. She thought her remedies had finally taken hold. She thought it was the mullein, working slow the way mullein sometimes does. And I let her believe it. I stood in our kitchen and watched her smile, the first real smile in a month, and I let her believe a lie, because the truth would have cost more than I was willing to pay. Or so I thought. The thing about secrets in a plain community, they don't stay secret. They can't. There are too many eyes, too many buggy roads where someone sees you turning left when you should be turning right. It was only a matter of time. It was Rebecca's cousin, Anna May, who told her. I don't blame Anna May for that. She wasn't being cruel. She was doing what women in our community do. She was protecting her own. Anna May had seen my buggy at Martha's twice, the second time on a Thursday afternoon when I'd told Rebecca I was pricing feed at the co-op in Bird in Hand. Anna May didn't come to me first. She went to Rebecca. And she didn't say it with malice. She said it with that careful, quiet voice our women use when they're handing you something heavy. "I thought you should know. Joseph's been visiting Martha Stoltzfus. Regular." That's all she had to say. I wasn't there when she said it. I was in the barn oiling the harness leather, which is a thing I do when my mind won't settle. The smell of neatsfoot oil, to this day that smell takes me back to the moment Rebecca came through the barn door. She didn't slam it, that would have been easier. She just stood there, the late October light behind her, her face in shadow, and she said, "How long?" Not a question, really, a demand. And my hand stopped moving on the leather, and I knew in my bones that the lie had come due. I told her everything, standing there in the barn with the horses shifting in their stalls and the smell of hay and oil and manure thick around us. I told her about Martha's tincture, the lobelia, the wild cherry bark, the 7 drops. I told her about Daniel's cough and how I'd watched it break in 3 days after weeks of nothing working. And I watched Rebecca's face go through something I still can't fully name. It wasn't just anger. It was, I think the word is humiliation. Because I hadn't just gone behind her back. I'd gone to the one woman she couldn't bear to be indebted to. And worse, the remedy had worked. Martha's remedy had done what Rebecca's couldn't. That was the knife. Right there. Not the sneaking, not the lying. The fact that another woman had healed her son when she couldn't. I don't know what to call what I saw in her eyes that evening. I just know I wanted to take it back, all of it, even if it meant Daniel still coughing. Rebecca didn't speak to me for 4 days, not a word. She cooked, she cleaned, She tended the children. She milked the cow at 5 in the morning, and I could hear the rhythmic sound of it from our bedroom. The tin pail ringing, the cow shifting her weight, and it sounded like the loneliest thing in the world. I slept in the front room on the bench by the stove. I didn't argue about it. On the second night, I went out to the back field and stood by the fence post where Dat and I had strung the wire together the summer before he passed. I didn't pray. I wanted to. I tried to form the words, but they wouldn't come. I just stood there and listened to the creek down the hill and thought about how a man can do the right thing and the wrong thing in the same breath and not know the difference until it's too late. That's what the old ones knew. That healing and hurting sometimes use the same hands. On the 5th day, the bishop came. I don't know if Rebecca sent for him or if the talk had already reached the church. Our bishop, Bishop Levi Baylor, he was a tall man, thin as a fence rail, with hands that were too big for his body. He sat at our kitchen table and accepted the coffee Rebecca poured, and he looked at me with those pale blue eyes and said, "Tell me what happened, Joseph." Plain, so I told him, again. The whole thing, and Bishop Levi listened without moving, his big hands wrapped around the coffee mug, the brown one with the chip on the rim that we always gave to guests because it was the biggest. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said something I didn't expect. He said, "The boy is well?" I said, "Ja." He nodded. "Then the Lord provided. The question is what you did with the way he provided it." He wasn't talking about the tincture, he was talking about the lie. He was talking about the silence. And he looked at Rebecca then, and his voice got softer, the way a man's voice gets when he's about to say something that's going to cost somebody. "Rebecca," he said, "your husband was wrong to hide this from you, but I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer it honest. If he had come to you and asked to take the boy to Martha, would you have let him?" Rebecca's hands were in her lap. She was twisting the corner of her apron, rolling it between her thumb and finger, over and over. She didn't look up, and she didn't answer, not right away. The clock on the wall, the wind-up clock Dad had given us as a wedding gift, ticked so loud in that silence it sounded like it was inside my chest. Finally she said, "No," just that, one word, and Bishop Levi nodded like he'd known. And I think that's the moment something cracked open in the room. Because the truth wasn't just that I'd lied, the truth was that Rebecca's pride, and I say that with all the love I have for her, because she's the strongest woman I've ever known. Her pride had almost cost our son something we couldn't get back, and my cowardice had done the same. We were both wrong, but we were wrong in different directions. And neither of us knew how to say that out loud until a man with 2 big hands and a chipped coffee mug made us sit with it. What Bishop Levi asked us to do, I need to be careful here because I don't want you to hear this the way it sounds. He didn't order anything. That's not how our bishops work, at least not ours, he suggested. Firmly, he said that I needed to confess to Rebecca, a real confession, not just the facts but the sorrow, and that Rebecca needed to go to Martha and thank her for the remedy, for the healing of our son. He said the word he used was acknowledge. Acknowledge what Martha had done. And Rebecca, I watched her face when he said it. Her mouth pressed into a line so thin it almost disappeared. But she didn't say no, she couldn't, because Bishop Levi was right, and she knew it. And that's the part the title of this story comes from. I didn't make Rebecca apologize the way the English use that word, like I forced her, like I held something over her head. I made it necessary. My actions, my sneaking, my lying, created a situation where she had to face a woman she'd spent 4 years avoiding and say words that tasted like vinegar in her mouth. I did that, and I carry that. We went to Martha's on a Saturday. The sky was that pale gray it gets in late October when the color has drained out of everything and the trees are half bare and the fields are stubble. Rebecca wore her black bonnet and her good cape, and she sat beside me in the buggy without speaking the whole 3 miles. I could feel her, not her body, her will, like sitting next to a coiled spring. When we pulled up, Martha was on the porch, like she knew. Maybe Anna May told her. Maybe the district told her. It doesn't matter. She stood there with her arms crossed, and she looked at Rebecca, and Rebecca looked at her, and something passed between them that I will never understand because I'm a man, and whatever broke between those two women broke in a language I don't speak. Rebecca stepped down from the buggy. She walked up the porch steps and she said, I'll never forget this, the exact words. She said, "Your father's remedy healed my son. I should have come to you myself. I was wrong not to." And Martha uncrossed her arms and her face did something. It softened, but not like kindness, more like relief. Like she'd been holding something tight for 4 years and could finally set it down. She said, "Come inside, I'll make tea." And they went in. And I sat in the buggy with the horse stamping and the cold coming through my coat, and I waited. I waited for an hour and a half. I don't know what they said in there. Rebecca never told me all of it. But when she came out, her eyes were red and she was carrying a small jar, dark amber, with a handwritten label, and she got in the buggy and put the jar in her lap and said, "Take me home." That's all. We rode 3 miles in silence. But it was a different silence. The first silence had teeth. This one was, I don't have the right word, tired maybe, clean. That was 11 years ago. Daniel is 15 now, strong as a young horse. He helps me with the farm, and sometimes in the evening I watch him carry a hay bale on each shoulder, and I think about the boy who couldn't breathe at 3 in the morning, the boy whose ribs showed through his nightshirt like the slats of a broken fence, and I think about 7 drops of a dead man's tincture in warm water. That's what the old ones knew, that the cure doesn't always come from the hand you expect, and that the hardest part of healing isn't finding the right root or the right leaf. It's finding the humility to accept it from someone you don't want to owe. I learned that. Rebecca learned it harder. And Martha taught it without trying, the same way her father taught her, by just being there when someone finally came to the door. If you're watching this and you grew up somewhere the remedies lived in the women's hands, where healing was quiet and fierce and nobody thanked the right person, I see you. If you carry a recipe your grandmother wrote on a card you're afraid to lose, I see you. If you've ever been too proud to ask for help from the one person who had what you needed, I see you. If you left the plain life and you still reach for honey and garlic when your throat burns in January, I see you. If you lost someone and you lie awake wondering if the old remedy might have saved them, if someone had just tried, I see you. And if you're the Martha in your family, the one who keeps the garden and waits for people to come when they're ready, I see you most of all. Wherever you are in this, you are not alone. Leave me a comment. Tell me, is there a remedy in your family that someone almost didn't share? A healing that almost didn't happen because of pride or silence or an old hurt? I want to hear it. And if your family carried a cure that was never written down, tell me what it was, even a piece of it. Let's not lose these things. There's so much more I haven't said yet. There are remedies I haven't been ready to share, but I'm getting closer. If you want to hear them, subscribe to Rebecca's Husband. This is where the old ways get remembered. And if a super chat or a membership feels right, that's you saying these stories matter. And I hear you. The cure you're afraid to ask for is the one you need most.